A single mother, laughed out of a lawyer's office for her $2 inheritance, was about to walk away from the only home she'd ever have. But when she opened the old trunk her grandmother left behind, the lawyer on the other end of the phone would go completely silent. This is a story about how the things we think are worthless can sometimes hold everything we've ever been looking for. And if you've ever felt counted out, or like you've been left with nothing, I hope you'll stick around and subscribe, because this is a place for stories just like that. I think you'll understand. It all started on a Tuesday, in a room that smelled of old paper and expensive disappointment. The chair was leather, cracked and deep, and it seemed to want to swallow me whole. Across the vast expanse of a mahogany desk, Mr. Davies adjusted his glasses. He was a man made of straight lines and muted colors, from his gray suit to his neatly parted gray hair. He looked at the file in front of him, then at me, then back at the file, as if he were trying to solve an equation where the numbers simply didn't add up. "So, to reiterate, Ms. Vance," he said, his voice as dry as autumn leaves, "your grandmother, Eleanor Vance, has left you the entirety of her estate." I just nodded. My son, Leo, was a warm 3-year-old weight in my lap, his soft breathing a tiny anchor in the sterile, floating world of that office. I'd had to pull him out of his daycare, the one I could barely afford, for this meeting. The letter had made it sound urgent, official. The word estate had hung in my mind for a week, a shimmering mirage of possibility. Estates meant money, stability, a life where I wasn't constantly choosing between paying the electric bill and buying a new pair of shoes for a growing boy. He cleared his throat. "The estate consists of 2 items. First, the deed to the property at 144 Sparrow Creek Lane in Coldwater County." He slid a thick piece of cardstock across the desk. It looked ancient. I didn't reach for it. Coldwater County. I'd only ever heard the name in my mother's stories, whispered with a strange mix of bitterness and longing. It was a place hours away, a place my grandmother had retreated to and never left, a place we were never welcome. "And second," Mr. Davies continued, a flicker of something, pity perhaps, in his eyes. He opened a small beige envelope and delicately tipped its contents onto the polished wood. 2 $1 bills. They lay there, limp and pathetic, under the recessed lighting. I stared at them. $2. Leo stirred, pointing a chubby finger. "Money, Mama!" I laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. It was a short, sharp burst of air, the sound of a balloon popping. The mirage of the last week vanished, leaving behind the familiar, gritty landscape of my life. $2, I said, the words tasting like rust. Mr. Davies offered a tight, sympathetic smile. "It's a legal formality in many cases, to make the will valid. A token." A token? Of what? A lifetime of silence? Of my mother's unanswered letters? Of a granddaughter she'd never met? It felt less like a token and more like a final, perfectly crafted insult. He saw the look on my face, and his professional mask softened. "Elara," he said, using my first name for the first time. "There is more to discuss regarding the property." He slid another paper across the desk. This one was glossy, a letterhead from a company called Ridgeback Development Group. "They've been trying to buy the land from your grandmother for years. She always refused. The offer is still on the table. In fact, they submitted a new one this morning, aware that the estate would be in transition." He turned the paper around for me to see. My eyes scanned the numbers, but my brain refused to process them. $75,000. To me, it might as well have been $1 billion. It was a number so far outside my reality that it had no meaning. "They want the land," he explained, his voice low and even. "It's undeveloped, borders a state forest. They're planning a series of luxury cabins. It's a generous offer, considering the state of the property." "What state is that?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "It's neglected," he said, choosing his word carefully. "The house is likely uninhabitable. Property taxes are in arrears, about 2 years' worth. The sale would cover that. The remainder would be yours, minus my fees, of course." He folded his hands. "Frankly, it's your only real option. The property is a liability, not an asset. Taking this offer is the smart move. It's a clean break, a fresh start." A fresh start. The words echoed the ones I told myself every morning when I woke up in my cramped, one-bedroom apartment before the sun came up to get ready for my shift at the diner. Every time I looked at Leo and felt the crushing weight of responsibility, I prayed for a fresh start. And here it was, packaged in a corporate letterhead. All I had to do was sign a piece of paper. Give away a place I'd never seen, left by a woman I'd never known. It felt too easy, and after a lifetime of things being hard, easy felt suspicious. "What if I don't want to sell?" I asked. The question surprised me as much as it did him. Mr. Davies blinked. "Well, you'd be responsible for the back taxes, immediately. The county could seize the property and auction it off. And as I said, the house itself, it's been vacant for some time. Your grandmother was in a nursing facility for the last year. Before that, she wasn't able to keep up with it." He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Elara, I advised your grandmother to take this deal. It would have made her last years much more comfortable. She was stubborn. You don't have to be." "Stubborn? My mother used to say that about her. So stubborn she'd rather freeze than ask for help." I looked down at the $2, then at the deed. Sparrow Creek Lane. It sounded like a place from a storybook, not a place with liens and developers circling like vultures. "I need to think about it," I said, scooping the 2 bills into my pocket. They felt flimsy, unreal. Leo was getting fussy, squirming to get down. The meeting was over. The illusion was gone, replaced by a choice I didn't feel equipped to make. Mr. Davies stood as I did, gathering the papers. "The offer from Ridgeback is only good for 30 days. They're eager to close before the end of the fiscal quarter. Don't take too long." He handed me a business card and the heavy cardstock of the deed. His handshake was brief and dry. As I walked out of that silent, air-conditioned office and back into the noisy, humid city street, the deed felt impossibly heavy in my hand. It was an anchor, pulling me toward a past I knew nothing about. The $75,000 was a lifeline, a chance to finally pull myself and Leo onto the shore. But something in me, a small, stubborn flicker I hadn't known was there, resisted. It was the same feeling I got when I looked at the single, faded photograph I had of my grandmother. A young woman with my eyes, and a look on her face that wasn't mean, just fierce. Like she was guarding something. Maybe she was. And maybe, just maybe, I was supposed to find out what it was. That night, sleep wouldn't come. Leo was a warm lump of perfect trust beside me in our shared bed, his small hand curled around my finger. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the old refrigerator and the distant wail of a siren, the city's constant, lonely lullaby. For 2 years, since Leo was born and I'd officially aged out of the state's marginal care, my life had been a series of calculations. Hours worked versus cost of daycare. Price of groceries versus the gas needed to get to work. Every dollar had a job. Most had two. I lived in a fortress of pragmatism I had built brick by brick out of necessity. There was no room for sentimentality, no room for maybes. And yet, I got up and walked to the tiny kitchenette. On the counter, next to a stack of bills, lay the deed. 144 Sparrow Creek Lane. I picked it up. The paper was thick, textured, the lettering ornate. It felt more like a certificate than a legal document. It felt important. Mr. Davies's words echoed in my head. A liability, not an asset. The smart move. A clean break. He was right, of course. He was a professional. He saw a dilapidated house, back taxes, and a quick, clean profit. $75,000. I tried to imagine it. I could put a down payment on a small condo in a better neighborhood, buy a reliable car, start a savings account for Leo's education. I could finally breathe. For the first time in my adult life, I wouldn't be drowning. All I had to do was let go of a piece of land I'd never seen, a house that was probably falling down, left to me by a ghost. It was the only logical choice. But my mother's voice was there too, a faint whisper in the back of my memory. She rarely spoke of her mother, and when she did, her words were a tangled mess of anger and hurt. "She chose that place over me," she'd said once, late at night, after a particularly hard day. That dirt and those trees were more important than her own daughter. My mother died when I was 16, a sudden illness that swept her away before I had the chance to ask all the questions that burned in me now. She'd left me with a box of old photos, a deep-seated fear of being alone, and this fractured, incomplete story of the woman who had abandoned her. Was that what this was? A final piece of that abandonment? Or was it something else? I thought about the photograph, the one I kept in my wallet. My grandmother, Eleanor, probably no older than I was now, standing in front of a half-built porch. Her hair was wild, and she had a smear of dirt on her cheek. But her eyes, they were clear and focused, staring down the camera as if it were a challenger. That wasn't the vacant look of someone who didn't care. It was the look of a fighter. I traced the raised lettering on the deed with my finger. What was I fighting for? A better shift at the diner? A landlord who might fix the leaking faucet? My dreams had become so small, so immediate. Maybe this was a chance to want something more than just not drowning. Maybe it was a chance to own a piece of the sky. The decision felt less like a choice and more like a current pulling me along. I couldn't sign that paper. Not yet. Not until I saw it. I had to stand on that patch of dirt my grandmother chose over everything else. I had to see the house she built and then let fall to ruin. I had to know if my mother's story was the only one. The next morning, I called the diner and told them I had a family emergency. It was a lie, but it also felt like the truest thing I'd said in years. I used the last of my meager savings to buy 2 bus tickets to a town called Pine Ridge, the closest stop to Coldwater County. I packed a small bag with clothes for me and Leo, a few toys, and the faded photograph from my wallet. And at the bottom of the bag, I placed the deed. It felt like planting a seed. I had no idea what would grow, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a sliver of something that wasn't fear. It might have been hope. The bus ride was a journey from one world to another. We left the city under a blanket of gray smog, the buildings pressing in on all sides. Leo, usually so boisterous, was mesmerized, his nose pressed against the window. For hours, the scenery was a blur of concrete, strip malls, and highways packed with angry cars. Then, slowly, things began to change. The buildings grew farther apart. Patches of green appeared. The sky widened, turning a brilliant, sharp blue. Leo fell asleep, his head heavy on my lap, as the city finally released its grip and the landscape opened up into rolling hills and dense forests of pine and oak. The air that hissed from the bus's vents even started to smell different, cleaner, laced with the scent of damp earth and pine needles. We were the only ones who got off at Pine Ridge. The bus station was just a small, covered bench outside a general store that looked like it hadn't changed since the 1970s. The bus pulled away with a sigh of its air brakes, leaving us in a profound silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and the rustle of wind in the tall trees. It was unnerving. I was used to the city's constant symphony of noise. Here, the quiet was so loud it felt like a presence. A sign on the store window read, "Taxi," with a phone number underneath. I called it. A gruff but not unkind voice on the other end said his name was Earl, and he'd be there in 10. While we waited, I bought Leo a bottle of juice and myself a coffee. The woman behind the counter had kind eyes and a web of wrinkles around them. "You're not from around here," she said. It wasn't a question. "No," I admitted. "We're headed out to Sparrow Creek Lane." Her expression shifted, a subtle change I couldn't quite read. It was a mix of curiosity and something else. Pity? "The old Vance place," she said, her voice dropping a little. "No one's been out that way in a long time. Not since they took Eleanor." They took Eleanor. It sounded so dramatic, like an abduction. I remembered Mr. Davies' more sterile phrasing, a nursing facility. "She was my grandmother," I said. The woman's eyes widened. She looked from me to Leo, who was now trying to climb a display of canned beans. "Well, I'll be," she whispered. "You have her eyes." Earl's taxi was an old boat-like sedan that smelled faintly of gasoline and wintergreen. He was a large man with a thick beard who grunted a hello and loaded my bag into the trunk without a word. As we drove, he seemed to feel the need to fill the silence. "So, the Vance place," he said, looking at me in the rearview mirror. "You family?" "Her granddaughter," I said. He nodded slowly. "She was a tough old bird, Eleanor was, kept to herself. People around here had all sorts of stories about her. Said she was crazy. Said she was hiding something." "Was she?" I asked. He shrugged his massive shoulders. "Don't know. All I know is she loved that land. Fought tooth and nail to keep it. A big city development company tried to buy her out for years. Sent a fancy lawyer in a suit and everything. She sent him packing. Told him she'd rather burn it to the ground than sell it to the likes of them." We turned off the paved road onto a dirt track that was more of a suggestion than a road. Branches scraped against the sides of the car. The forest crowded in, dark and ancient. "This is as far as I go," Earl said, pulling over where the track became impassable. "It's another quarter-mile walk up that way. You sure about this? There's nothing up there." "I'm sure," I said, paying him. He hesitated before giving me my change, his gaze lingering on Leo. "You need a ride back to town, you call me. Don't you two be staying out here after dark. It's not safe." He didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask. I thanked him, and he turned the big car around with difficulty and rumbled back the way we came, leaving us once again in that deep, humming silence. I held Leo's hand in one of mine and my small suitcase in the other, and we started walking. The air was cool and smelled of pine. Sunlight filtered through the dense canopy above, dappling the path in shifting patterns of light and shadow. It was beautiful, but there was an undercurrent of wildness to it, a sense of being watched. After a few minutes, the path opened into a clearing, and I saw it. The house. Mr. Davies had said, neglected. That wasn't the right word. It looked wounded. It was a small, simple salt-box house, once painted a cheerful blue that was now peeling away in long strips, revealing the weathered gray wood beneath. The porch roof sagged dangerously on one side. A window was boarded up. The yard was a riot of overgrown weeds and wildflowers, reclaiming everything. But it was still standing. It hadn't fallen. It looked like it was waiting. "Wow," Leo breathed, his small voice full of awe. He wasn't looking at the broken-down house. He was looking at the view. The house sat on a small rise, and behind it the land fell away into a valley. We could see for miles. A river snaked through the valley floor like a silver ribbon, and beyond it mountains rose up, their peaks hazy and blue in the distance. It was the most beautiful place I had ever seen. I walked toward the front door, my heart pounding a strange rhythm in my chest. There was a key in the envelope Mr. Davies had given me. It was old and iron, heavy in my hand. It slid into the lock with a rusty shriek, and with a push of my shoulder, the door swung inward, opening into a dark, still space. The air that rushed out was cool and musty, thick with the smell of dust, time, and forgotten things. I took a breath, stepped over the threshold, and left the world I knew behind. The inside of the house was a time capsule. A thick layer of dust covered every surface, turning the whole world a soft, uniform gray. In the main room, a simple stone fireplace stood against one wall, its hearth cold and empty. A sofa and two armchairs, their floral patterns faded, were draped in white sheets, looking like sleeping ghosts. Sunlight streamed through the grimy windows, illuminating swirling dust motes in golden shafts of light. It was a sad place, but it wasn't scary. It felt peaceful, like it had been holding its breath and had just let it out. "It's dusty, Mama," Leo said, wrinkling his nose. I set our bag down and took his hand. "We're just looking, sweetie." We moved through the small house, room by room. The kitchen was tiny, with a porcelain sink and an old-fashioned stove. A chipped mug sat on the counter, as if waiting for a coffee that never came. Upstairs, there were two small bedrooms. The first was empty, save for a simple bed frame. The second, I assumed, had been hers. A handmade quilt, its colors still surprisingly vibrant, was folded neatly at the foot of an iron bed. A small wooden desk sat under the window, and on the wall above it, a calendar was still turned to a page from over a year ago. It was here that I felt her presence most strongly. This was where she slept, where she woke up and looked out at that same breathtaking view. I ran my hand over the quilt. The stitching was small and perfect. My mother had told me she was a master quilter. It was one of the few fond memories she'd shared. On the desk, a few books were stacked neatly. Poetry, a guide to local birds, a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Nothing that gave me any real insight, any answers. I felt a familiar pang of disappointment. What had I expected? A letter? A diary confessing all her secrets? I was being foolish, chasing a ghost. Mr. Davies was right. This was a ruin, a money pit. The smart thing to do was to call Earl, go back to town, and phone the lawyer to accept the offer. I could feel the $75,000 calling to me, a siren song of safety and relief. But as I turned to leave the room, my eyes caught on something. Tucked under the bed, almost completely hidden in the shadows, was the corner of a large, dark object. I knelt, my knees cracking, and reached under the dusty bed frame. My fingers brushed against old, worn leather. I pulled it out into the light. It was a trunk. A huge, old-fashioned steamer trunk, bound with leather straps and brass fittings. It was heavy, solid. On the top, almost faded but still legible, were initials embossed in the leather. E.V. Eleanor Vance. My heart started to beat faster. This was it. If there were any answers to be found in this house, they would be in here. The trunk was locked, of course. A heavy brass lock held the clasps shut. There was no key. I felt a surge of frustration. To come this far, to find this one potential link to her, only to be stopped by a simple lock. I looked around the room, desperate. My eyes landed on the fireplace tools downstairs. I went and grabbed the iron poker. It felt heavy and purposeful in my hand. For a moment, I hesitated. This felt like a violation, breaking into her last private space. But what choice did I have? I needed to know. I wedged the tip of the poker into the hasp of the lock and pushed. The old metal groaned in protest. I put my weight into it, gritting my teeth. With a loud, ugly crack, the hasp broke. The lock fell to the floor with a thud. I paused, my breath catching in my throat. The silence that followed was absolute. I lifted the heavy lid. It opened with a low creak, releasing a new smell into the dusty air. Not must, not decay. It was the clean, sharp scent of cedar and old paper. My hands were trembling as I looked inside. The trunk wasn't filled with clothes or old keepsakes as I might have expected. It was filled with paper, stacks and stacks of it, tied neatly with twine. Ledgers, folders, envelopes. It looked like the contents of a filing cabinet. This wasn't a box of memories. It was a box of business. Disappointment warred with curiosity. I lifted the first bundle. It was a series of bank statements, going back decades. I saw deposits and withdrawals, a life recorded in neat columns of numbers. Another folder contained receipts, for lumber, for roofing nails, for bags of cement, for a well pump. Receipts for everything needed to build and maintain a house, all paid in cash. This wasn't the record of a woman who neglected her home. This was the record of a woman who had built it, piece by piece, and fought to keep it standing. And then I saw it. Lying on top of a thick manila folder was a single, long envelope. My name was written on the front in a spidery, elegant script. Ilara. My hands shook so badly I could barely pick it up. This was it. The letter I hadn't dared to hope for. I sat down on the dusty floor, Leo playing quietly with a dust bunny nearby, and carefully broke the seal. The letter was written on thin, almost translucent paper, covered in that same delicate handwriting. It was dated a week before she was taken to the nursing home. She must have known her time here was ending. "My dearest Ilara," it began. The words blurred as my eyes filled with tears. No one had called me dearest in my entire life. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and you have come home. I hope you have come home. This place has been waiting for you since before you were born. I had to stop and take a breath, pressing the heels of my hands into my eyes. Home. She called it home. I know you will have questions. I know the stories you have been told. I know your mother, my sweet, lost daughter, believed I abandoned her. In a way, she was right. But I need you to understand why. I need you to know that every choice I made, every cold word, every unanswered letter was an act of protection. It was the only way I knew to save this for you. The letter was long, several pages. I read on, my world tilting on its axis with every sentence. She told me about my grandfather, a man my mother had never spoken of. His name was Marcus, and he was charming, handsome, and deeply in debt to dangerous men. He saw this land not as a home, but as collateral. He tried to sell it, to mortgage it, to give it away to settle his gambling losses. I had to get your mother away from him, she wrote. I had to get her somewhere safe. So I sent her to the city, to my sister, telling her I needed space. It was a lie. I was trying to break Marcus's hold on us, but he wouldn't let go. The only way to truly protect the land, to ensure he could never touch it, was to divorce him and become its sole owner. But the men he owed money to, they didn't care about legal documents. They would have come for me and for the land, regardless. So she made a choice, a terrible, calculated choice. She cut everyone off. She let the stories about her grow, that she was crazy, reclusive, hostile. She made herself a pariah. She made the property seem worthless, neglected. She stopped paying taxes, letting the debt accumulate, knowing the county was slow to act and that it would deter anyone from trying to force a sale. It was a shield, a 30-year performance of poverty and madness to protect this small patch of earth. It broke my heart to push your mother away, the letter continued, and here the ink was smudged, as if by a tear. She thought I didn't love her, but I loved her so much I gave her up. I loved you, the grandchild I would never meet, so much that I became a monster to guard your inheritance. Not an inheritance of money, but of freedom, of a place to stand where no one can tell you to leave. I was sobbing now, great, silent, gulping sobs. Leo, sensing my distress, crawled into my lap and wrapped his little arms around my neck. I held him tight, the pages of the letter crinkling between us. It wasn't abandonment. It was a siege. My grandmother had spent her entire adult life holding this ground, alone, against everyone. The stories, the neglect, the $2, it was all part of the camouflage. She had made herself small so that this place could one day be big for me. My whole life, I'd carried the story of being unwanted. Left by a father I never knew, a grandmother who was a cruel mystery, a mother lost too soon. I was a product of abandonment. But this letter, this beautiful, terrible letter, it rewrote everything. I wasn't the last link in a chain of broken connections. I was the reason the chain had held. The grief was immense. For my grandmother's lonely life. For my mother, who died believing she was unloved. For all the years lost to a misunderstanding that was really a sacrifice. I cried for all of them. I cried until my head ached and my tears ran dry. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the floor. The golden light that filled the room was soft and forgiving. After a while, I felt a sense of calm settle over me. The grief was still there, but it was joined by something else, a fierce, burning pride. I came from a line of fighters. My grandmother fought for this land. My mother fought to raise me on her own. And now it was my turn. But what was I fighting for? Or against? As if on cue, my phone, which I thought had no service here, buzzed in my pocket. The screen lit up with an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me answer. "Hello? Ilara? It's David Davies." His voice sounded tinny and far away. "I'm glad I reached you. I wasn't sure you'd have reception out there." "What is it, Mr. Davies?" I asked, my voice hoarse from crying. "I have some news. I've just gotten off the phone with the legal team from Ridgeback Development. They're aware you're visiting the property. They've authorized me to present you with a new, final offer." I held my breath. "They're prepared to offer you $250,000. The number hit me like a physical blow. $250,000. It was an absurd, life-shattering amount of money. It was a get-out-of-jail-free card for my entire life. No more diners, no more landlords. A future for Leo, secure and bright, handed to me on a silver platter. "They need an answer by tomorrow morning," Mr. Davies said. "This is a one-time offer, Ilara. Take it or leave it. And I have to advise you, as your counsel, to take it. This is a lottery ticket. It would be insane to walk away from it." Insane. The word my grandmother had worn like armor. I looked around the dusty room, at the fading light, at the open trunk filled with her life's work. I looked at her letter, clutched in my hand. I thought about her, alone in this house for 30 years, fighting off the world. She hadn't done it for $250,000. She had done it for this ground, for this view, for this quiet, dusty, wounded, beautiful house. She had given me a choice, not between a broken-down house and $250,000, but a choice of what kind of person I wanted to be. Was I the person who took the easy money, the clean break? Or was I my grandmother's granddaughter? This is the moment when everything crystallizes. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where two paths diverge so clearly that you just know, that your choice will define the rest of your life? It's terrifying, and it's the most alive you'll ever feel. If you're here with me, in this dusty room, feeling the weight of this decision, I want to thank you. It means you understand that some things are more complicated than they seem. If these kinds of stories about hidden strength and impossible choices resonate with you, I really hope you'll subscribe to the channel. We're building a community here of people who get it, and I read every single comment. Your stories matter too. Now, let's get back to that phone call. The silence stretched on. I could hear Mr. Davies breathing on the other end, waiting. He thought it was an easy choice, the only logical choice. Maybe for the person I was yesterday, it would have been. But yesterday, I didn't know who I was. Today, I was beginning to find out. I took a deep breath, the cedar-scented air of the trunk filling my lungs. It smelled like strength. It smelled like home. But there was still one more thing. My grandmother was practical. She was a fighter, but she wasn't a fool. This grand, beautiful sacrifice, it felt incomplete. There had to be more to it than just the land itself. She wouldn't leave me with a moral victory and an unlivable house. I looked back into the trunk. Beneath the stacks of ledgers and receipts was a false bottom. I hadn't noticed it before. A small fabric loop was sewn into the cedar planking. My fingers trembled as I pulled it. The false bottom lifted away easily, and underneath, my breath caught in my throat. It was cash, stacks and stacks of it, wrapped in faded bank bands. 10s, 20s, 50s, hundreds. It was old money, worn and soft. I couldn't even begin to guess how much was there. It wasn't a fortune, but it was far more than the $2 she'd left me on the lawyer's desk. Tucked beside the money was one last thing, a small velvet pouch. Inside was the key to the trunk, and a final folded note. "This is your start," it read. "Not an escape, but a foundation. The land is your inheritance. This is your toolbox. Use it to build, not to run. The choice is still yours. It always will be. But know that you are not starting from nothing. You are starting from a place of love." And that was it, the final piece. She hadn't left me with an impossible choice. She had left me with a real one. The money from the developers was an escape, a ticket out of my life. This money, her money, painstakingly saved over decades, was an investment, a stake in a new life, right here. It was the difference between being bought and being empowered. "Elara, are you there?" Mr. Davies' voice crackled, impatient. "Yes," I said. My voice was clear, steady. "I'm here." "So, what should I tell them? We'll accept the offer, of course. I'll start drafting the paperwork." "No," I said. It was just one word, but it felt like the strongest thing I had ever said. It felt like a stone being dropped into a deep well. "No?" he repeated, confused. "What do you mean, no?" "I mean, no, thank you," I said, and a smile spread across my face. A real one. "I won't be selling. Please inform Ridgeback Development that the offer is rejected." For a long moment, there was nothing but static on the line. I could picture him perfectly, sitting in his sterile office, his logical world completely upended, the equation no longer balanced. He had calculated the value of the land, the taxes, the dilapidated house, but he hadn't calculated the value of my grandmother's love. He hadn't calculated the weight of her sacrifice. He went completely silent. It wasn't a brief pause. It was a long, deep, profound silence. The sound of a man who had been so sure of the world, suddenly realizing he didn't understand it at all. He was a man who dealt in assets and liabilities, in profits and losses. I had just made a choice that didn't fit on his spreadsheet. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. The professional condescension was gone, replaced by a genuine, unvarnished astonishment. "Elara, are you certain? $250,000. "I'm certain, Mr. Davies," I said, looking at Leo, who had fallen asleep in my lap. "This place is not for sale." "But the taxes, the repairs, how will you manage?" "I'll manage," I said. "My grandmother left me everything I need." I didn't elaborate. He didn't need to know about the money in the trunk. That was my toolbox, my secret, my foundation. There was another long pause. Then he said something I never expected. "Good for you, Elara." His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. "Good for you." And then he hung up. I ended the call and sat there in the gathering twilight, the weight of the world lifting from my shoulders. I had done it. I had made the choice. The hard choice. The right choice. It wasn't the end of my problems. It was the beginning of a whole new set of them. The house needed a roof. The taxes needed to be paid. I had a son to raise in the middle of nowhere, in a house with no running water and questionable electricity. It was going to be incredibly, punishingly hard. But for the first time in my life, it felt like my hardship. A hardship I had chosen, a mountain I had decided to climb, not one I had been pushed down. The next morning, I woke to the sound of birdsong, a riotous, joyful chorus unlike anything I'd ever heard in the city. The light pouring through the dirty window was pale and soft. Leo was still asleep beside me on the floor, where we'd made a makeshift bed out of the old sheets from the furniture. For a moment, I felt a pang of panic. What have I done? The sheer scale of the task ahead threatened to overwhelm me. But then I looked out the window at the valley, wreathed in morning mist, and the fear subsided, replaced by a quiet determination. I found the old well pump in the backyard. The handle was rusted stiff, but I put my whole body into it, grunting with effort, again and again, until finally, with a groan and a shudder, it began to move. A trickle of rusty water sputtered from the spout. Then, slowly, miraculously, it began to run clear. Cold, clean water. It felt like a victory. I spent the morning exploring the land. It was bigger than I thought. The 5 acres sloped down behind the house, through a meadow of wildflowers, to the edge of a small, chattering creek. Sparrow Creek. It was real. There was an old, collapsed barn, its timbers silvered with age, and the ghost of a vegetable garden, now choked with weeds, but its raised beds still visible. My grandmother hadn't just built a house. She had built a homestead. As I walked, I thought about the money in the trunk. It was a significant sum, more than I'd ever had, but I knew it wouldn't last forever. It wasn't quit your job and live like a queen money. It was fix the roof and buy a used truck money. It was pay the taxes and get the power turned back on money. It was exactly what she said it was, a toolbox. The first call I made was to Earl, the taxi driver. He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Thought you'd be long gone by now," he grunted. "I need a ride into town," I said, "and I need to know who the best roofer in the county is." There was a pause. "You're staying?" "I'm staying," I confirmed. I could almost hear his beardy smile over the phone. "Well, I'll be. Old Eleanor's granddaughter. Should have known you'd have some of her grit. I'll be there in an hour." That afternoon, in Pine Ridge, I walked into the county tax office. It was a small, quiet room that smelled of coffee and disinfectant. I paid the 2 years of back taxes in cash. The clerk, a woman with a kind face, looked at the pile of bills, then at me and Leo, and didn't ask a single question. She just stamped the papers with a satisfying thud and said, "Welcome back to the county, Ms. Vance." Welcome back. Not just welcome. It felt like a confirmation. My next stop was the library, where I used their public computer to search for grants for restoring historic homesteads, for small farm loans, for programs that supported single mothers starting small businesses. The world that had seemed so closed off to me before, a world of applications and bureaucracy, now seemed full of possibilities. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was looking for a partner. I was a landowner, a steward. I had something to offer. The work was slow. The first weeks were a blur of cleaning. I scrubbed away years of dust and grime. I tore out the rotten floorboards on the porch. I hired the roofer Earl recommended, a quiet man named Jeb, who showed up with his 2 sons and fixed the roof in 3 days for a fair price, shaking my hand firmly when he was done. People in town started to talk. The woman at the general store saved the day-old bread for me. Earl refused to charge me for half my trips. They were watching, I realized. The community my grandmother had held at arm's length was cautiously, quietly, opening a door for me. They had respected Eleanor's fierce independence, and now they seemed to respect my decision to follow in her footsteps. One evening, a few months later, I was sitting on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains in strokes of orange and purple. The house was clean. The power was on. We had running water. It was far from perfect, but it was ours. Leo was chasing fireflies in the yard, his laughter echoing in the quiet air. My phone rang. It was Mr. Davies. His voice was different now when he spoke to me. The professional distance was gone, replaced by a genuine curiosity. "I just thought I'd call and check in, Alara, see how you were faring." "We're doing okay," I said, smiling. "We're making it a home." "I heard," he said. "News travels, even from Coldwater County." I also had another call from Ridgeback Development today. My heart skipped a beat. "They're not giving up." "No," he said, "but they're not making an offer either. They wanted to know if you'd be willing to discuss selling a conservation easement for the back half of your property, the part that borders the state forest." A conservation easement. I knew what that was from my research at the library. I would sell the development rights to the land, meaning it could never be built on, but I would still own it. It would be protected forever. "They're under pressure from the State Environmental Board," he explained. "Developing the rest of their project is contingent on them preserving a wildlife corridor. Your grandmother's land is that corridor. They need you." I started to laugh. It was a real, deep, joyful laugh this time. The irony was just too perfect. My grandmother had fought them off for 30 years, and now they had to pay me, to help them protect the very land they'd tried to take. "What should I tell them, Alara?" Mr. Davies asked, and for the first time, he sounded like he was asking for my instructions, not giving me advice. I looked out at the dark line of trees where my property met the forest. I thought about my grandmother's fierce, protective gaze in that old photograph. She wasn't just guarding the house. She was guarding all of it. The creek, the trees, the wild things that lived there. "Tell them," I said slowly, savoring the words, "that I'm willing to listen. But my price is going to be very, very high. This story, my story, isn't really about an inheritance of money or land. It's about inheriting a legacy. It's about discovering that the story you've been told about your life might not be the whole truth. Sometimes, the things that look like abandonment are actually acts of radical protection. Sometimes, the people who seem the most broken are the ones holding everything together." My grandmother left me a dilapidated house and $2. But she also left me a choice, a foundation, and a new story for myself. One where I am not a victim of my circumstances, but the architect of my future. A future built on a piece of ground that was paid for with a lifetime of lonely, stubborn, beautiful love. It's a lesson I'm still learning every day as I watch Leo grow up under this wide open sky. The lesson is that home isn't just a place you are given. It's a place you choose, a place you fight for, a place you build. And sometimes you have to tear down the old stories to make room for a new foundation. If this story has stirred something in you, if it made you think about your own family, your own inheritance, whether it's land or just a story, I'd be honored if you would share your thoughts in the comments below. What does the word home mean to you? Your experiences are part of a larger story, and this channel is a place to share them. Thank you for listening, for being a part of this.